So now I can just go and plant a tree whenever, however, wherever.
Unfortunately, it's not that easy.
Welcome to a new episode of UBT Green Talks. In this episode, we will present possible ways to mitigate biodiversity loss and ecosystem damage on different levels, as individuals, as a community, and also on a macro-political level. In our previous episode, we explored the damage caused due to climate change and human activities. If you missed that, make sure to check it out to check up on the issues discussed. In this video, we have the insights from Professor Beierkuhnlein, Dr. Robert Weigel, as well as from Lars and Berin, members of Klimawald Bayreuth. Let's start with Professor Beierkuhnlein's opinion on why it is important to take action to deal with the current challenges we are facing and how can we do so.
We are threatened by drought, we are threatened by heavy rain, by flooding. Hundreds of people have been losing their lives, even in Europe during the last few years, by flooding. And there's incredible economic losses already now caused by climatic changes and extreme conditions like drought. People have to save water already now at the beginning of the year in Spain. There are regulations to have reduced water use for drinking water. So urgent action is needed, yes, for fighting against biodiversity loss, for fighting against climate change. But I think, the message has to be urgent action is needed to maintain the quality of life of human beings on this planet. Because we need biodiversity. Biodiversity is like an insurance for our quality of life.
As Professor Beierkuhnlein highlighted, biodiversity is essential for maintaining our quality of life. Now let's hear from the Klimawald team on how their initiatives contribute to this goal. Joining me today are Berin and Lars from Klimawald Bayreuth.
So the Klimawald Bayreuth is a project of students started back in 2019 with the goal of identifying different tree species that perform good under the current climate and the changing climate in the future. And the idea was to take areas that are devastated by the past climate events and plant new species on it to see how they perform and how they react to different events. Behind us is the first plantation area, which was done in 2019 and started the whole project. On there are several of the most prominent species used in forestry today and some more exotic species that we'd like to try out. So I'll show you around and show you some trees.
Great, let's go.
There's 11 different species planted here on purpose. And additional to that are species that go in here on their own from the surrounding area. On this side you can see the effect of human maintenance on the forest. We are standing in between planted fir trees, which you can see over here, which are very well maintained. So there's no competition, there's no other trees competing for light, for resources, for water. While behind us there's a lot of birch growing, which is coming in from outside of the area and is slowly but steadily overgrowing our fir trees. And we keep that area sort of wild to show the rapidness with which the birch is growing and also show the need for maintenance in a managed plantation like this is. Okay, so Mirna, we're now in the chestnut area of a forest. And I'd like to show you some of the chestnut trees, because in this tree you can see some damage on the earlier leaves and quite healthy newer leaves. So from here to there you can see some sort of climate event like a frost or a drought that has severely stressed the tree and has not provided sufficient resources like water. So the leaves began to wilt, but you can see on the newer leaves that they are quite healthy again. And that's actually one part of the things we're trying to learn here, how well these trees are during the stress, but also how well they can cope with the stress afterwards. So how quickly they recover and to what state they recover and how well they perform. A big problem in this forest was early spring frost, which damaged a lot of trees. And we were a bit worried, but now we're really happy because the trees recovered again and are now growing in the late summer. Oh, that chestnut. Oh, that's interesting, yeah. Let's actually go over there. The dead chestnut tree, next to it is another. And that just shows that there's some natural variation in the process. So over here you have a live chestnut, there's a live one.
Yeah.
This one died off for now, seemingly unknown reasons. We try to find out how many of these reasons could there be and what's the prominent ones. For example, on the Buchstein side here, we have some problems with water. So this is a very sandy soil, so water is not retained for very long, which may have been the reason why this one died off. But on the other hand, it's not a bad thing that the tree died off, because it still provides habitat, and it's now a decaying tree which provides dead wood to the forest, which is not always a bad thing, but sign of a functioning ecosystem.
While the Klimawald team is researching climate-resistant species and comparing controlled versus wild plantations, let's take a look at how the Ecological Botanical Garden on our campus is implementing sustainable land management practices.
So what we could do as a land manager is to think about strategies how to conserve also these less competitive species. And one way is that you frequently mow the meadow and you take away the biomass, or this is one hypothesis. And what you can see if the meadow was not mown for long, for example, is that then the grass species often take over. And taking them out arguably might profit the smaller plants.
I guess that explains the selective mowing, right? Because here we see some flowers still and part that are not mowed, and then the other parts who are.
Like you say, here it looks like we stopped in the middle of the work, but actually this is intentional because we also have to think about the insect diversity. Also the grasses, they are a valuable habitat for insects, and if you mow too often, if you mow too early, you damage this, you endanger the insects that are living there because you damage the habitat. And this is why we follow like a scheme where every meadow is mowed just once a year. And then we have an early cut, like where we are standing right here. We go to our meadow places and we look where did the grasses take over, and we say, let's go in there, take out the grass there, all the biomass, and let's wait for a second flowering. Yes, but we know that even we are in the beginning of July now, and even after this date, insects will live in the taller meadow parts. This is why we also leave some parts of our meadows until October or November even.
As we've seen, the Ecological Botanical Garden carefully manages its meadows to preserve biodiversity. Now let's switch back to the Klimawald team to learn about how they handle and manage their part of the forest. You mentioned that you did plant some trees. Do you also do the maintenance of these trees? As I understood, also the members maybe come and go, or students have finished their studies and leave. What happened to the trees afterwards? Who take care of them?
So the lucky case with this side is that there's an enthusiastic team who takes care of the trees. We do the concert basically, and in this case we're lucky to have the city of Bayreuth on our side, who are in the end kind of the owner, and who have their own team of gardeners and people working in forestry, who really take care of this side. We have other sites around Bayreuth where other people are the landowners and where it's a bit more difficult. And that's also coming to show that it's really necessary to look after the site afterwards. Us students are more responsible for monitoring the individual trees, monitoring the data that we collect, monitoring the effects of the trees, like gathering the knowledge, so to say. And then also refining that knowledge and somehow bringing it back out to the public, to other students, to groups who come here for tours, to school children even, and to show what we've learned here and to help with that knowledge.
The only way to cope with these developments is to maintain biodiversity. So biodiversity, of course, the preservation of biodiversity, I agree totally that it has an intrinsic value and we have an ethic, responsibility as humans to maintain biodiversity. But maybe many people would not come along and wouldn't say, well, I'm not interested in that. But everybody is interested of not losing his life, and everybody is interested in having water, and everybody is interested in not being threatened by landslides. And all that together, of course, can only be, the risks can only be reduced by maintaining and promoting biodiversity. If we don't have stable forests in steep slopes in the Alps, then the people that live in the valleys are threatened with their lives.
What's special about the ecosystem in the Alps?
Well, the plants in the Alps, to put it in very general terms, are living under very harsh conditions. Yeah? Only a thin soil layer, cold temperatures in winter until long into the growing season. Then the plants, like you can see here, they are exposed to the sun radiation because there is not much shade. Yeah, they have to deal with UV radiation, heat stress also. This is what the plants have to live with. They are specialized to these harsh conditions by small growth and short growing season. And nowadays, this ecosystem is under pressure. It's a little bit similar like in the meadow, what I showed you. We have the global change, which also includes the climate warming. And this means that more warm adapted plants from the lower elevations in the mountains, they can migrate upwards into the formerly alpine zone, and they might outcompete our alpine specialists there. It's not only a climate change problem in the Alps, it's also a global change aspect if you consider changing management techniques. For example, formerly the farmers took their cattle to the alpine meadows, and there was this cattle browsing basically of the meadows, and this is this theory that the more opportunistic species will take over and outcompete those small growing plants that are especially adapted to this cold habitat.
That also have an economic consequences, right?
Exactly, or it's a consequence of changed economic landscape, because nowadays if you have 20 cows and you take them to the mountain during summer, it's really a lot of labor. And we do not pay, you have to say it, we do not pay enough for it as a consumer, I guess. It's much more profitable to have 200 cows in the flat terrain in northern Germany, and we can buy milk from there, and meat. So this probably, economic change affected heavily the ecology of the Alps.
So economic change can result in biodiversity loss, like in the example of the Alps. But at the same time, biodiversity loss has an impact on the quality of life. So what could then be possibilities to reduce this impact?
The consequence then might be to make it through technical constructions. But these would be so expensive that not even the best economy in Europe could afford to do so. So we need to develop ecosystems in the catchments. We need to devote valleys for flood regulation, and not by walls, but by forests, by biodiversity, by natural rivers, by wetlands. So this is no longer a value per se, it's also a value for the human society. And this is also why companies, industries, economies are increasingly interested also to invest into biodiversity, because the economic value of biodiversity is more and more seen.
Now let's look at a practical example of how the Klimawald team collects data from their trees. And what do they use this information for? Berin, I've seen all these devices. What are they for?
They are all different devices. Our main aim is essentially, as he said previously, we want to understand how, for example, different weather events like droughts or like frost influence the trees. But usually the problem is if a drought occurs, it takes a few weeks until you really see it on the tree. And so it's difficult to differentiate the effects. Let me show you what we can actually measure using these dendrometers. Yeah. So I will show you how we first fix it to the trees. And what we are now interested and want to achieve using these sensors is measuring how the diameter of the stem of the tree changes over the day. And how we do this is you can see here this stamp which is movable, and we can measure how much it moves using the sensor. And as a result, if, for example, the tree is starting to grow, the stem expands and will push it in this direction outwards. And thus we can measure that the stem diameter increases. And the other way around also, if it like shrinks, it will go back, and then we also get a measurement for this deflection. And because it's very, very accurate, we can really observe over the day how in the morning and during the day the water, the tree grows, uses up the water, that the stems shrink and it decreases, and then later on over the night, if there's enough rain, it will take up water again and will expand again.
So now, Berin, you have all this data from this device. Is there anything else that you measure, and what do you do with it? Yeah,
using this device, we know whether a tree grows or not. But what we really now want to see is actually how this relates to the current weather conditions, for example, due to some drought, and how they react. And that's why we also have installed on one side moisture sensors over there, which enable us to measure simply the moisture in the ground. And we also have our own weather station in this direction, where we measure temperatures, precipitation, and also wind speed. And so we can really relate how the trees react on the current weather conditions and whether, for example, they are sensitive to droughts or not, and how it also it's different between different trees, because we have them installed not only like for this one, but essentially for all the tree species planted here.
Beyond research projects and awareness campaigns, what other actions can individuals and communities take to protect our ecosystems?
Well, on the individual behavior, of course, there's many options. So people that have gardens, people that go by bike, the daily consumption, the way of a diet, and so on. So I think we know sufficiently what we should do and what's not so good for the environment, and nobody is perfect, of course. I think it doesn't make sense to have regulations where people are obliged for a certain behavior. And we see so much changes also in generations also, of course, and also in my own family with my kids. I see how they are thinking about the food and their daily life, of course, because they feel more and more the responsibility for their own future. And there are international contracts and regulations where nations agreed and has been even ratified in the parliaments to follow the Convention on Biological Diversity and the European Biodiversity Strategy for the year 2030, which is very close. Just a few years left for action, and we shouldn't wait until 29. So we should start now in implementing what is needed. And I think for that, the societal acceptance of decisions are absolutely crucial in these times.
Any final thoughts or messages you would like to share with our audience?
Yeah, I think it's irresponsible to make people believe that, well, action is not needed for fighting against biodiversity loss, also at the local scale, not just at the global scale. It's not about preserving the rainforest. In Uganda, it's important, and that's also important, but it's also important to really enhance biodiversity at the local scale, and it's also important to fight against climate change now, because the risks and the costs for the society are increasing year by year.
Lars, Berin, thank you so much for this very insightful tour. How can people find out more about Klimawald Bayreuth?
So we have a homepage where you can on one side see all the current live measurements we're doing, but also our other projects on the other Klimawald forests around Bayreuth, and there you can see what we are currently doing, where you can get involved.
Yeah. And Lars, anything else you would like to add?
I'd really like to add that people should appreciate the biodiversity also in their surroundings, also here in their cities in Bayreuth, in the forests around their home, and try to understand nature in front of their doorstep.
Robert, thank you so much for this lovely tour today. It was really very insightful, and I'm sure that there are still a lot more to learn and maybe do another tour in the Botanic Garden.
Yes, you're most welcome, and I can really invite you and all of the viewers, please visit our homepage, check out our program for the guided tours. We invite everybody, the students, the public, families, young, old, yeah. I mean, this is the main purpose why we are here. Yeah, educate everybody about the diversity on our planet.
Here we come to the end of this episode, where we presented potential actions at different levels in order to contribute to ecosystem preservation and prevent further biodiversity loss. What about you? Share with us in the comments section how you're taking steps to protect biodiversity and ecosystem health around your home. Finally, remember to stay informed, stay involved, and most importantly, stay green.